This episode is brought to you by SS&C Mineralware. Are you managing mineral assets and feeling overwhelmed? Unsure if you're getting paid what you're owed? SS&C Mineralware is here to simplify the management of your minerals, royalties, and non-operated working interests. Mineralware's out-of-the-box features give you the tools you need to visualize and keep track of all of your assets in one place. Mineralware lets you know in seconds where your interests are, what's active, what acreage is open for lease, and if you're getting paid what you're owed. With Mineralware, you can even automate your revenue and JIB processing and eliminate tedious manual data entry, allowing you to focus on more pressing issues. Thousands of mineral owners rely on Mineralware to keep their mineral management simple, automatic, and all in one place. Take control of your mineral assets today with SS&C Mineralware. To see a demo, you can visit their website at www.mineralware.com. That's mineralware.com.
Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. In this episode, we're going to talk about what best practices are if you are looking to lease your minerals or just want to get found. So a big question I always see, we get asked this question also when people send us emails is, what do I need to do for an oil company to find me, or what do I need to do to lease my minerals? Do I need to start contacting oil companies? What is the process? And so we want to break that down and give you some tips and best practices in a free form document that you can download to use to make sure that companies can find you. And we'll talk about how and why you might need to do that. So Justin, what's your experience been with this? And what are your thoughts in this area?
I think it gets complicated quick, and there are so many flavors or variations that can occur for people. But like we were talking about before we hit record, Matt, if they're developing an area and they really want to find you, that is what these folks do professionally. So landmen are very familiar with trying to track people down. And many times they will do the due diligence to find you. And maybe there's exceptions where you don't have marketable title or there's a big gap in the last person's name that was in the county records. And there might be some other variations too, Matt. But I think anybody who owns a mineral property, right, this question comes up a lot when maybe you've been contacted about one property and the thought goes through your mind, oh, what else is there? What else could be out there? And there are ways to answer that question. But I think a lot of folks get kind of trapped in learning how to do that.
Yeah, and that's a great point because I think this, what we're going to talk about primarily applies to what you know about already. And so before you go through this whole process and file the documents that we're going to talk about, that maybe it's a good idea to do a cursory title search to see if there are other mineral tracts out there that you don't even know about, that maybe you have an interest in or that you would have inherited. And usually when this is the case and you don't know about them, there is a title defect. It means that the property is still under an ancestor's name and not in your name. In other words, you don't have marketable title. Otherwise, you'd know about it because you'll have a deed that is in your name. But, in that scenario, Justin, what has been your best practices or tips that you could give on how do you go about finding that? And we talk about that in some other episodes, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. But just kind of high level, what are the things to think about there?
County records are really where you're going to find the information. And I'm lucky that most of the properties are in Texas and New Mexico in my case. So online records are pretty easy to access. You can go through the county records, find out where your ancestors might have been named and find the properties. It's a good, foundation to build. But if you're just learning about this, collecting those documents really is step one and trying to put the link together of how those kind of go together.
So basically what we're talking about is performing a title search, and that is something we cover in episode 10, which is how to perform a title search. And so we talk through that process of going to those county databases and searching for your ancestors' names and how to kind of work back through time until you connect the dots. If you want more step-by-step instruction on how to do that, it's something I cover in my Mineral Management Basics online course. To find out more about that, you can go to mineralrightspodcast.com/courses. But that is something that is important to do, at least have a good idea that, okay, we've done the high level research to identify everything we know about first. And we've found copies of those important documents related to those. And again, in that course, I have a checklist of those important documents that you should have for every mineral property. And once you have that information at hand, then Justin, do we need to find and contact each of the oil companies or operators that are active in the area where we own minerals? Or what's your experience been when it comes time to leasing?
And I think, a lot of people kind of come into the situation of they want to lease their minerals and, they don't know if they're active in the area or what might be going on. And Matt, kind of a canned bit of knowledge you hear a lot, which is a really great best practice, is to go look in that county at the land records and see who might be active there. A lot of states, Matt, also have a GIS viewer or a map where you can see where there might be activity. But it really is two questions right at that point. If you're trying to lease and there's no activity, you're looking at who might be active around that area. Or if you're just finding out about this property, you're looking to see if there's current production on the property.
Yeah, and it seems like it's one of those things that if there's not a lot of activity, you may not be able to get very competitive lease offer. There may be people out there, if it's let's say it's in the Delaware Basin, you're in like Lee or Eddy County, New Mexico, for example, but you're a little bit further away from where they're currently drilling. There may be companies that are willing to lease your minerals, but the terms they're going to offer you are not going to be super competitive because they don't have to be. There's not competition there to lease. And so if you find somebody that is interested in leasing, it's likely to be more of a speculator or somebody that is going to give you a very low lease bonus offer and a lower royalty rate, as well as the primary term is probably going to be very long just to, they want to maximize the chance that they can flip that lease into somebody that's actually going to go and develop it. And so in that scenario, be careful about what you find out as far as like somebody that is actually interested. If you haven't been contacted already by an oil and gas company, then you're looking at probably more of a speculative type situation, in which case, all the things that we talk about, all the clauses and things you should negotiate for, they're going to probably say, no, I can't do that. I can really only offer you this sort of standard, kind of average or lower royalty rate, just because I'm taking a lot of risk and paying you to lease these minerals. And if nothing happens, I'm not going to be able, there's really not a market for me to flip this or to do anything with it. So that's the type of scenario to be careful of when you go proactively looking to lease minerals. But I think the saying I think that applies here is, don't call us, we'll call you, really applies, because when companies are active in an area and leasing, they're going to identify all the mineral interest owners. They're going to do a very comprehensive title search and prepare what is called a title opinion. So they'll have their title attorney review everything and identify the owners, and they'll have identified that, more than likely you're the heir. If you have an ancestor that died intestate, in other words, without a will, and what the laws of intestate succession look like and who should have gotten what, and all of that will play into, okay, here's who we think owns this. And, not always, but in many cases, they'll identify those heirs and contact all of the heirs and all the possible people to lease, particularly if you have a larger interest that's going to have a material impact on that drilling unit. If it's a very small interest, they may not go to that trouble. It may just be something where they try to identify the past owner or the owner of record, and then they'll try to contact that and it'll get bounced, and then they'll force pool you or whatever. Your family's interest is often what happens instead, because they have that mechanism to address that, at least in states with compulsory pooling or forced pooling. So that is the motto, though, is that usually you'll start getting calls if there is the plan to drill on your minerals, or your minerals are going to be included in a unit, then they're going to contact you. That said, to make it easier for them to make sure that they're able to contact you, there are some best practices and some tips that we'll talk about and some documents that you can prepare and file. And, some of the things there is, first of all, is if you're in that situation, you're already proactively kind of managing this and aware of it. First thing is to find out, what activity is going on in your minerals, who are the major operators that are drilling, where have the latest permits been filed, and you can kind of see the progression. It'll start moving to your area, or maybe it's already on your area and you have permits there and you're getting contacted to lease, which is a great place to be. Justin, what are your thoughts if you're in that situation and you've gotten that first call? What are the things you're thinking of to make sure that that process goes well and you get the best offer possible?
At that point, you're really trying to see whoever you're talking to, are they going to give you the best offer? And just like comparing any other offer, if you're shopping for a car, a house, whatever, you're going to look at multiple options. But you have to be a bit more proactive in this case, Matt. So you might need to go and look in the county records, see in that area who might be active. And like you mentioned, if they're already developing in that area, there's incentive for them to give you a better offer. And then there's also, you want to try to figure out, is this person looking to hold the lease, or are they trying to get a low offer from you so they can turn around and sell it to an operator? And maybe you can cut out that middleman. But like any other lease negotiation, Matt, there's a back and forth, and then obviously you want to get multiple offers if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen that where I've gotten offers from the company that's working on behalf of the operator that is planning to drill. And then I've gotten other offers from landmen that are sort of speculating and trying to get in, and have seen that, there's some open minerals in this newly proposed unit. I can go in and try to grab them and, keep an override or flip it or do whatever, participate in the well. So you'll see that often. And, again, like Justin said, when he says find out who's active, that's searching the county records and see who has recorded a lease or a memorandum of lease, within the last 6 months or so. And you can find a list of those companies, make a list of those companies, contact them. Oftentimes there's brokers that are doing this on behalf of an oil company. It may not be apparent at first glance who they're actually working for, but you can kind of piece things together if you look at the filings in the state. If there's been, let's say, a pooling order in that section, you can see the operator that filed for that pooling order, and you can see the leases, and you can match up, okay, these brokers are obviously working for this oil and gas company leasing the acreage. But as far as, so let's say you're all set. You haven't moved in 20 years. There's probably not much else you need to do. And you have the minerals in your name, of record. So in other words, when your ancestor passed away, you received those minerals. The name on the deed is, and the address is the same as your current name and your current address. You really don't need to do anything. At that point, it's just wait and see. Now, if you've moved, Justin, what do you do, or what's some of the tips if you've, let's say, changed names, first of all, have moved, or other things like that might make it harder for the landman to find you?
The change of address form, Matt, it's a standard form that is really a handy one, and you'll see them in the county records when you go looking. This is a great way if you're making a big move, or if your name has changed, that you can reassert this or put this link there in the county records, which is where they're going to be looking for you anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, can often be recorded as an affidavit of address or notice of address change or something like that, or change of address form, whatever it's called. It's just a document that is an affidavit that says, hey, here's my current name, here's my current address, here's my previous name or previous address. And you have it notarized and you file it of record in the county, so that when somebody's doing a title search and they're looking for who the current owner is for those interests, they can find, and it'll come up in that search, and they'll say, oh, okay, yeah, that person, this lease that's out there that's held by production, or this deed that was filed 20 years ago, looks like they've changed names, they've gotten married, and they've moved. And here's that current information. And so great, now I know when I go search for that name on the databases that are out there that have, all kinds of information like addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, and things like that, they can match it up with the right person and make sure they're, calling the right John Smith, because it's sometimes hard to find. If you have a very common name, it's harder for them to skip trace you. In other words, go through those databases and identify your current contact information so they can get a hold of you. But that is something that those companies are very used to doing. Like Justin mentioned, it's very common for them to be able to do that, to find your current information, even if you don't have one of these forms out there. So don't worry if you're like freaking out, oh my gosh, they're leasing in my area today, I don't have a form out here, they're going to miss me. Don't worry, it's more than likely they'll find you and contact you. But I think it's a best practice to file these change of address affidavits in the county where your minerals is located, just to help make sure that they know where to contact you, how to contact you, and to sort of shortcut that process. So it means you might get contacted earlier versus them having to go through and really, find out, after the fact, oh yeah, that was the right person, and we've already forced pulled their interest, and then you missed that opportunity. And so there is some opportunity there that goes with having this address information easily findable. And be careful though too, I'd say, this is something you can easily do. Helpful to have an attorney prepare this document and review it to make sure it's accurate and complete. But you don't need to hire a mineral owner registry service. So that is something that I've seen kind of occasionally people say, hey, register your minerals with this database. Landmen do not look at those, generally speaking, those mineral owner registry databases, because they're looking at what's of record in the county, because that's the official record of who owns what. And so that is not a substitute for having your information in the official public record. So if you sell or buy interest, don't think that filing it in a registry database is going to do anything from a legal standpoint. It's just a third-party service that's out there. You need to file it of record in the county where those minerals are located. And so that's why when it comes to these change of address forms, it's something you can very easily do yourself and fill out. And in fact, we'll have a link in the show notes to a free form that you can download that you can use as a starting point to get this. And like we always mention, always have any legal document reviewed by an attorney before you sign it. And with that disclaimer out of the way, it's a great start and should get you 95% of the way there. But again, don't treat it as a legal advice or anything like that. So, Justin, what are the things that people need to think about if the minerals are still in their ancestors' name? So we have this idea of filing these documents in the county, but what are the bigger picture things that people need to be thinking about there?
Marketable title is really, I think, the most important thing. And we say that word a lot, but it can really include a lot of different things and be situational. And Matt, we did an episode, it was episode 85 with Richard Winblatt, where we talked about marketable title, but this can take a lot of different flavors. And I think people fall into this more often than they think. Let's say that there was an estate that was an ancestor's estate that wasn't very clear for whatever reason. If there is a gap or a question, typically on the operator side in the title opinion, they're going to have some note of that. And perhaps that note still gets them to reach out to you, try to find you to clarify, but perhaps there's a bigger question there. And it can leave you in a situation to where, they're not 100% sure what to do, or maybe you don't get necessarily the amount of effort to track you down that you should. And with that, Matt, it's, making sure that if it's in your ancestor's name, the most common thing we hear is that, hey, they've just inherited this and someone is reaching out to them. There's a couple different ways that an operator might ask you to rectify that. It could be an affidavit of heirship that allows them, or at least makes them feel more secure in paying you guys. But it may not be the same as what needed to happen from an attorney's perspective, which would be filing a deed or, doing some probate or maybe whatever else it is, Matt. So again, really important, like you mentioned, to get with an oil and gas attorney. But this may be a problem that is not necessarily something that you did, but it could be a generation or even a couple generations back where you need to go in and do some corrective title measures, make sure it's clear. And then, this may be handled for different properties in different ways too, as questions come up.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, just keep in mind, if you do go the route of filing an affidavit of heirship, that it's not something that will cure title. There is the chance that somebody can come in and challenge that, and so it's not going to give you marketable title. Some operators will, if it's a small enough interest, they'll pay you even with an affidavit of heirship. They'll tell you what you need to do. So the first step is to contact the operator and just ask them, if you find a property that's out there that you should be getting paid royalties, you're not. Contact the operator, find out what they need in order to get the ownership switched into your name, and so that you can start receiving royalties. They may say that an affidavit of heirship is okay to them. It depends on their level of risk tolerance and how big the interests are. If it's a significant amount of money, they're probably going to want you to go through probate and to get a deed in your name so that they know for sure that you're the correct owner. And so they'll put the interest in suspense. In other words, they'll just hold on and kind of keep that money in escrow, waiting until you have marketable title before they'll pay you. So that is something that you definitely need help from an attorney to navigate that correctly. When it comes to determination of heirship or probate, it is something you need to hire an attorney to go through, generally speaking, and get help with. The other thing, so that's kind of the bigger picture. If you identify stuff out there that's still in an ancestor's name, it's more than likely you do not have marketable title. You need to go through some process to get it transferred to your name and get help from an attorney. So that's the big picture guidance we can give there. And again, like Justin said, definitely listen to episode 85 for more information on that. But say that you are actually the rightful owner. You have, you're the owner of record in the county records, but you've had some life events happen since you've inherited the property or purchased it or whatever the way you acquired it, beyond moving, right? So it could be that you've had a name change through marriage, a divorce, or a legal petition, and other things like that can happen that may disconnect that clear linkage between you and that property. And if that's the case, that's where this affidavit of your address change and then also your name, and there could be a need for a separate form if you've had a name change to also give notice of that. But that is something where this might come in handy, more handy even than just in general. So if you've moved as well, that's just, your name hasn't changed, but you've moved. It's a great idea to file this. Obviously, it's something, if you have minerals in multiple counties, it's something you're going to have to do in each county. And so there'll need to be something filed in each of those counties where the minerals are located. And we'll talk about what that document should include to make sure that it is complete and that, it gives really a clear picture of what you own and how to contact you. Another event I would say is if you've transferred minerals into a trust without recording a memorandum of trust or a deed that transfers the minerals into the trust, which, in other words, funding the trust. Oftentimes, if you are dealing with an attorney that's not familiar with oil and gas properties or mineral rights, they may not know or really think about the need to fund the trust with those minerals. And so what that means is basically you have to have a deed that transfers the minerals from the current owner of record to the trust. And so that'll be an important thing to make sure that if you're desiring to have the minerals held in a trust, that the trust actually is the owner of record when somebody searches for that property. And so all of that comes together. And again, you could have those events to where that trust document can actually kill two birds with one stone. It can give you transfer the ownership and then also have the current address on there. And similarly, anytime you file or record a new deed, that is an opportunity to update the current address and owner information. And so obviously goes without saying that is what that will achieve. But that is another option, is if you have an event where you're transferring ownership to an LLC or a trust, we'll just use that as the process for documenting your current address. Some other tips, Justin, for minerals who want to be ready for leasing. What are some other things to think about?
Putting together documents, Matt. When you come and you have these leasing offers, part of this is going to be confirming the information which they have. So having those deeds that property refers to, having an idea of how much you own, working with an oil and gas attorney to establish that if you're not comfortable doing so is really important. Because if you do have a lease offer come at you, one says one thing, one says another, somebody might have made a mistake. It is also not unheard of to accidentally sign a lease for more than you actually own, come to find out. So very important to do the title work. Often the oil and gas operators will have already done this on their end, but they're human and they make mistakes as well. So you want to be sure that it's confirmed on your side. Often when you go to these oil and gas attorneys, certainly start with a free consult. A lot of times you can cover a whole lot of ground, but if you have these documents prepared, the deeds, the plat maps, that can really help that oil and gas attorney, because otherwise they have to work with a professional like a landman or somebody within their staff to go find those documents to really give you the feedback that you need. Yeah,
that's a great point. And, the reason those documents are helpful is because it gives you, in addition to having a clear picture of what you own, you can see the history of what previous offers have been. So oftentimes you may get leased 2 or 3 times before a well actually gets drilled. And if you have a record of all of those, because we all have a lot going on in our lives. And if it's been 10 years since you leased it last, you may forget, what was that offer was it $500 per net mineral acre? Was it $1,000? I don't have copies of the check. I can't find, the deposit slip or whatever. If you have the letter and the correspondence, the information that lists out the terms of that previous lease, oftentimes you can find a copy of the lease recorded in the county, but sometimes not. If they've only recorded a memorandum of lease, you need to make sure you keep a copy of that previous lease agreement where you went through the trouble of hiring an attorney to get, good lease language and the PEW clause added and the no post-production language. Well, if you've done that already, you can reuse that language in the next time you get a lease offer on that property. If again, especially if that lease isn't of record, if it's just a memorandum of lease that was filed and not the original lease with all the language, so you definitely want to keep copies of all of those previous leases to see what terms you were offered, what kind of royalty rate, all of those things. And then again, being proactive and monitoring the activity, like Justin mentioned earlier, checking the State Oil and Gas Commission website for new well permits and drilling activity near your property, looking at the state filings where you can see if there's been pooling or spacing orders recently, then it might include your minerals. And then also consider joining an organization like the National Association of Royalty Owners. Both Justin and I are members and serve on the board or in different capacities. And that's a great organization because there's webinars, there's expert speakers that we have at our conventions that talk about tips for leasing and things like that. And you can learn a lot through attending those events. So all of that, I think is a good way to wrap up this kind of, okay, we want to lease our minerals. What do we need to do to make sure we're found and to make sure that that process goes as smoothly as possible? Again, find the link in the show notes to the affidavit form that you can use as a starting point to file in the counties where you own minerals. Things that document should include are the legal description of the property, your current name and address, and then make sure it's notarized. And that is something that will need to get recorded in the county, and there are recording fees that you're required. So maybe it's $20 to $30 depending on how many pages. Do not include any personally identifying information like your date of birth or social security number or driver's license number, anything like that. That can be used to steal your identity if it's out there in the public eye. So definitely, and not to say that that's probably not out there in the dark web for all of us anyway, but don't make it easier than it needs to be for somebody to find that information. So just should have the basic information, your legal name, your current mailing address, legal description of the property, and then some just very basic language in there, which again, you can use on that form letter. And just make sure that you sign it in front of a notary, get it notarized, and then record it in the county, and you should be good to go. So Justin, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I think we've pretty much covered it, Matt. There's a lot that goes to it. There are some really good episodes. If you're looking to manage your minerals, you could certainly listen to our episode with Jimmy Wright, who is always entertaining to listen to. But that was episode 180. Jimmy Wright's a mineral manager, and he really talks about some great practical tips. And then if you're early in the process, the title search that we've talked about in this episode, Matt, it's really important to know how to do that. And that's episode 10. So that's a great place to start if you're just learning about it.
Absolutely. And like always, we'll put links to all these resources in the show notes, which you can find at mineralrightspodcast.com. So thanks again for listening. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.